A stormy night, a knock echoes at a millionaire's door. When he opens it, a fragile little girl stands trembling in the rain. Her lips quiver, her eyes filled with pain, and then she whispers 4 words that shatter his world forever. What happens next will change both of their lives in ways no one could ever imagine. This is not just a story, it's a piece of someone's hidden pain, quietly waiting to be heard. In today's story, we dive into a moment that can change everything, in the most unexpected way. Before we begin, where are you listening from? Canada, the US, Norway? Let us know in the comments, because stories may begin anywhere, but they connect us all. Stay with us until the very end, because sometimes, what breaks your heart can also heal it. And if you believe stories can change lives, hit subscribe. Join our journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment. Your voice matters here. The night was silent, heavy with the kind of stillness that makes even the wealthiest man feel the weight of his emptiness. In the heart of the city, atop the tallest hill, stood a mansion so grand it seemed untouchable. Walls of glass and stone, gates of iron, gardens manicured to perfection. But inside, the man who owned it all sat alone, his heart guarded by years of loss, regret, and secrets that refused to stay buried. Edward Caldwell was a name that moved stock markets, opened doors, and silenced critics. To the outside world, he was the embodiment of success. Sharp suits, ruthless decisions, a jawline that could cut glass, and an empire built from the ground up. Yet behind closed doors, Edward was a man haunted. He lived in a house too large for one, spoke to walls instead of loved ones, and carried a wound so deep that no amount of money could heal it. On a cold autumn evening, as rain pattered against the windows and the fire cracked weakly in the hearth, a sound shattered the silence of Edward's mansion. 3 faint knocks at the door. He almost ignored it. No one ever came here uninvited. But something, a pull deep inside, made him rise from his chair. When he opened the door, there she was. A little girl no older than 7, her hair damp from the rain, her clothes worn and oversized as if they had belonged to someone else before her. She looked up at him with eyes so familiar, so piercing, that Edward's heart stumbled in his chest. And then she spoke. Just 4 words. 4 words that cracked open a man who had sworn never to feel again. You are my father. The storm had grown heavier by the time Edward Caldwell closed the door halfway, his hand still trembling from the words he had just heard. The girl stood there, rain dripping from her lashes, her tiny shoulders shaking under the thin sweater that clung to her. He should have turned her away, should have called security, the police, anyone. But those eyes, those impossible eyes, refused to let him shut her out. What did you say? Edward's voice came out harsher than intended, broken by disbelief. The girl swallowed, her lips quivering as she repeated slowly, with more certainty this time, You are my father. A million thoughts collided in Edward's mind. He had no children. At least none that he acknowledged. None that he believed were his. He had buried his past so deep that not even he dared to dig it up. And yet, here stood this child, delicate, fragile, but carrying a truth sharp enough to wound him. Impossible, he muttered under his breath, but his chest tightened with a pain he couldn't explain. The girl sniffled, looking down at her small shoes, scuffed and muddy from the rain. Mom said, if anything happened to her, I should find you. She told me your name. She said you would understand. Her words struck him harder than the storm outside. Edward's hand gripped the doorframe until his knuckles whitened. Memories long buried, rose unbidden, a woman's laughter, a fleeting romance he had abandoned, and a choice he had convinced himself was necessary to build his empire. He had walked away from more than one heart, leaving shadows in his wake. But which shadow had returned to him now? The girl looked up again, her eyes filled not only with innocence, but with something else, expectation. Please, sir, I don't have anywhere else to go. Edward's mansion, vast and cold, suddenly felt like it was shrinking around him. His wealth, his power, his reputation, none of it could shield him from the storm brewing within. He wanted to demand proof, to push the responsibility away, but a strange instinct whispered that this child carried a truth his heart already knew. He finally stepped aside. Come in. She crossed the threshold timidly, clutching a small backpack to her chest. The sight of her wet shoes leaving prints on his marble floor felt almost symbolic, her presence marking a territory she had every right to claim, though Edward had yet to admit it. Tell me your mother's name, Edward demanded, trying to mask the shaking in his voice. The girl hesitated, her small fingers tightening on her backpack straps. Finally, she whispered a name that froze Edward where he stood. It was a name he had not spoken in more than 7 years, a name tied to his deepest regret. Before Edward could speak, the lights flickered, and a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows. The girl's voice trembled as she asked a question that made his blood run cold. Why did you leave her? The name hung in the air like thunder after lightning, echoing in Edward's mind long after the little girl had whispered it. He hadn't heard it in years, but it struck him like a blow to the chest. Clara. Edward staggered back a step, as though the ghost of that name had pushed him. Clara, the woman whose laughter once softened the sharp edges of his ambition. Clara, the woman he had walked away from without a word of goodbye. He had buried her memory beneath layers of boardroom victories and hollow success, convincing himself she was just another chapter closed. And yet, her name was alive again, standing before him in the form of this child. He forced his breath steady, though his pulse thundered in his ears. "Clara is your mother?" The little girl nodded slowly, her wet curls sticking to her cheeks. "She told me if I was ever lost, or if she didn't wake up one day, I should find you." Edward's throat tightened. Didn't wake up one day. Fear slithered through him. He crouched to her level, though his eyes darted away, unable to hold hers for long. "Child, what do you mean by that? Where is your mother now?" The girl lowered her gaze to the marble floor, her voice cracking. "She's gone. She got sick. I tried to help. I tried to wake her up, but she wouldn't." Edward's chest constricted as if an iron band had wrapped around his ribs. Clara gone. The woman he had loved, abandoned, and avoided ever since. The one who had known the man beneath the armor of wealth. Guilt swept over him like a tide, drowning him in memories he'd worked so hard to suppress. But the girl's next words cut even deeper. "She told me you were a good man," she whispered, though her voice trembled with doubt. "She said you'd take care of me. She promised you wouldn't leave me too." Edward's heart twisted violently. A good man, him. Clara's faith in him, after all he had done, was unbearable. He rose abruptly, pacing across the vast living room, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. He needed air, logic, escape, but none came. Instead, he turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "What's your name?" he demanded. The girl clutched her backpack tighter, her lips trembling as she replied, "Lila." The name was delicate, almost fragile, yet it landed like a hammer in his soul. Lila, Clara's child. His child. His mind screamed against it, but his heart recognized something undeniable in her gaze. And then, before Edward could process further, Lila opened the small backpack she had been clutching so tightly. From inside, she pulled out an envelope. Worn, creased, but sealed. She held it out to him with both hands. "Mom said to give this to you." Edward's fingers trembled as he reached for it. He broke the seal with a mix of dread and desperation. Inside was a single handwritten letter in Clara's familiar script. The first line made his breath hitch. "Edward, if you're reading this, then I'm already gone, and it's time you faced the truth about our daughter." Edward's hands shook as he unfolded the fragile paper, the ink smudged slightly as though Clara had written it in haste, or perhaps with trembling hands. He sank into the leather chair near the fire, the flickering light casting shadows across his face as he began to read. "Edward, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't fight any longer. I tried for her sake. I tried to stay. But life has a cruel way of cutting short the moments we beg for the most. Please, don't turn away from these words. They are the last truth I can give you." Edward swallowed hard, his eyes burning. Clara's voice lived in every line, echoing in his mind as if she were seated beside him, whispering the words herself. "Her name is Lila. She is yours, Edward. She was always yours. I didn't tell you because I knew you. I knew the man who chose power over love, who left me without a backward glance. But I also knew deep down you weren't heartless. I saw the man you tried to bury under wealth and ambition. That is the man she needs." His breath caught. The words stabbed at the armor he had worn for years. He gripped the letter tighter, as though crushing it would silence the guilt screaming inside him. "I never wanted to burden you. I raised her alone because I couldn't trust that you would want her. But she deserves more than I could ever give. She deserves to know her father. If you truly have no love left for me, at least give her what I no longer can: safety, guidance, and maybe, if you find it in yourself, love." Edward's vision blurred, a tear slipping free despite his efforts to suppress it. Clara's forgiveness was unbearable, undeserved. He had left her, abandoned her when she needed him most. And yet, even in death, she believed in him. But then came the line that froze him, chilling him to his core. "If you refuse her, Edward, then beware. She will carry not only my memory but also a truth you may not be ready for. Someone else knows about her. Someone who may already be looking for her." Edward's heart slammed against his ribs. He read the line again, his mind racing. Someone else? Who? Why? His fortune had made him enemies, and Clara had known that. But what did she mean? He looked up sharply at Lila, who stood clutching herself near the fireplace, her wide eyes reflecting both fear and hope. "Lila," Edward said, his voice lower now, urgent. "Did your mother ever tell you about anyone else? Anyone who came to see her?" The girl hesitated, chewing on her lip, then nodded slowly. "There was a man, he came once. He scared Mom. She told me never to talk to him. She said if anything happened to her it would be because of him." Edward's blood ran cold. The fire cracked violently in the hearth, as if the house itself had felt the weight of her words. And in that moment, Edward knew. Lila's knock at his door was not just fate. It was a warning. Edward leaned back in his chair, the letter crumpling slightly in his trembling hands. Clara's warning gnawed at him, echoing louder with every passing second. He had always known his past would catch up to him eventually, but never like this. Never through the eyes of a child. Leela's voice broke the silence. Do you believe me now? Her question pierced him. She wasn't only asking if he believed she was his daughter. She was begging him to accept her, to not push her away as he had done to Clara. The weight of that truth pressed heavily on his chest. He wanted to deny it, to cling to the cold armor of logic, but her eyes, those same eyes that once looked at him from Clara's face, left him defenseless. Yes, he whispered finally, the word foreign on his tongue. Yes, I believe you? A relief flickered across Lila's face, but it was fleeting, quickly swallowed by fear. She looked toward the tall windows, where rain streaked down the glass like tears. Will he find us here? Edward stiffened. Who? The man, she said softly, her small voice almost drowned out by the storm. Mom said he wanted something from you. Something she never told me. But he scared her. She thought he'd hurt me if she didn't. She trailed off, her lower lip trembling. Edward's mind raced. Clara had kept secrets, but why? What did this man want? And how much did Clara know about his enemies, the ruthless competitors, the partners he had betrayed, the shadows that lurked around his fortune? He had built his empire on power, but every empire left cracks where darkness could creep in. He rose suddenly, pacing the room like a lion in a cage. For years he had lived behind gates, walls, and guards, convinced he was untouchable. But now, with this child, his child, sitting vulnerable in his living room, the fortress felt like glass waiting to shatter. Lila, he said, turning sharply toward her, did your mother ever give you anything else? Something important? Her little hands fumbled with the backpack again. She pulled out not toys or clothes, but a small battered music box. Its paint was chipped, its key bent slightly, but when she wound it, a haunting melody drifted into the air. A lullaby Edward remembered hearing Clara hum long ago. She said this was mine. Lila explained. She said it would keep me safe. Edward's eyes narrowed. Clara was clever, always had been. Could the box hold more than a lullaby? A message, a secret? He took it gently, inspecting it, his fingers tracing the edges. And then he felt it, a false seam at the bottom. His breath caught, he pressed his thumb against it, and with a faint click, a hidden compartment slid open. Inside lay a folded photograph and a key. Edward unfolded the photograph with care, his stomach twisting as his eyes fell upon it. There, standing beside Clara, was the very man Edward had once betrayed in business, a man who had sworn revenge. And scrawled on the back in Clara's handwriting were 4 chilling words. He knows about Lila. Edward's grip tightened around the photograph until the edges cut into his skin. The face staring back at him was one he had prayed never to see again, Victor Hale. The name alone was a wound. Years ago they had been partners, 2 ambitious men hungry for power. But ambition was a blade that cut deep, and Edward had struck first. He had taken the deal, the company, and the future that should have been Victor's. In return, Victor had given him a vow of vengeance. Now, seeing him standing beside Clara in the photograph, Edward's stomach twisted with dread. Why had Clara been with Victor? Had she gone to him for help? Or had Victor sought her out, knowing her connection to Edward? Edward's chest burned as he turned the photo over again. Clara's handwriting stared back at him, cruel and cold. He knows about Lila. He closed his eyes, the truth crashing down like thunder. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about blood, his blood, Clara's blood. Lila? A small voice pulled him back. Who is he? Lila asked, her wide eyes fixed on the photograph. Edward hesitated. How could he explain betrayal and greed to a child who had just lost her mother? How could he tell her that the man in the picture wasn't only a danger? He was the reason her life would never be the same. He's someone from a long time ago, Edward said carefully, folding the photo and slipping it back into the music box. Someone I hoped you'd never have to know about. But he knows about me. Lila's voice cracked, and for the first time, Edward saw tears welling in her eyes. Not the tears of a child begging for comfort, but the tears of someone already carrying too heavy a burden. Edward knelt before her, placing a hand on her trembling shoulder. Listen to me. As long as you're here, you're safe. Do you understand? I won't let anyone hurt you. The promise felt strange on his lips, but as he spoke it, something inside him shifted. For the first time in years, Edward felt a reason to fight that had nothing to do with power or wealth. This child, his child, was more important than everything he had built. Still, Clara's words echoed in his head. If you refuse her, Edward, beware. She hadn't been warning him about Lila. She had been warning him about Victor. Edward stood, running a hand through his hair. We need to be careful. There are people I can trust, but there are more I cannot. And if Victor is out there, he won't stop. As if on cue, a sudden noise shattered the tense silence. The sharp crack of glass breaking somewhere in the house. Edward froze, his heart lurching. Lila gasped, clutching the music box to her chest. Stay here, Edward whispered, his voice low but firm, though every nerve screamed with fear. He moved cautiously toward the sound, every step echoing through the cavernous mansion. The storm outside masked smaller noises, but he could feel it. Someone else was here. And then he saw it, the back window shattered, rain blowing in, curtains twisting violently in the wind. On the marble floor lay a single object, deliberately placed, not dropped. A black chess piece. The king. Edward's blood ran cold. Victor's signature. A message clear as day. Checkmate is coming. Edward stood frozen in the dim light, staring at the black chess piece glistening on the marble floor, his pulse hammered in his ears. Victor Hale had been here, or at least his shadow had. This wasn't just intimidation. It was a declaration. The king piece was no accident. Victor was reminding him of the game they had once played together, a game of strategy, betrayal, and ruthless ambition. But this time, the stakes weren't money or companies. This time, it was flesh and blood. Edward bent down, picking up the piece with trembling fingers. The rain howled through the shattered window, carrying with it a bitter chill that seeped into his bones. He clenched his jaw, swallowing down the fear. For years, Edward had built his empire by never showing weakness. But in this moment, weakness threatened to consume him. Behind him, a small voice quivered. What does it mean? Leela stood clutching the music box like a shield, her eyes wide, her knuckles white. Edward turned quickly, slipping the chess piece into his pocket before she could see it again. It means, he said softly, forcing steadiness into his tone, that someone wants to scare us. But I won't let them. She nodded, but her lip trembled. Mom used to say, when you're scared, it's because you have something worth protecting. The words struck Edward's heart like lightning. Clara's wisdom, passed down through their daughter, cut through the haze of fear. He realized then he wasn't fighting to save himself. He was fighting to save her, the last piece of Clara left in this world. He moved quickly now, ushering Leela away from the broken window. You'll stay close to me. Always. Do you understand? Yes, she whispered. Edward strode to his study, Leela trailing behind. He unlocked a hidden drawer, revealing a small handgun he hadn't touched in years. His reflection in the polished steel startled him. A businessman. A millionaire. A man who thought he had left behind the violence of his youth. And yet here he was again, preparing for war. But Victor wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was a predator, and predators didn't stop until they had torn apart their prey. Edward reached for his phone. There were people he could call, old allies, men who owed him favors. Yet, as he scrolled through the contacts, doubt gnawed at him. Who could he truly trust? Victor had always been skilled at buying loyalty. Before he could decide, the phone vibrated violently in his hand. An unknown number flashed on the screen. He hesitated, then answered. At first silence, then a voice, smooth and venomous, coiled through the receiver. Edward, Victor purred. It's been far too long. Edward's grip tightened. Stay away from her. Victor chuckled, low and mocking. Ah, so you've met little Leela. Precious, isn't she? Clara did well keeping her from you. But you know how secrets work. They always crawl back to the surface. Edward's throat constricted. If you touch her. You'll what? Victor interrupted, his tone sharp now. Edward, you taught me everything I know about winning. And now, I'm going to show you what it feels like to lose. Piece by piece. The line went dead. Edward lowered the phone slowly, his hand shaking, his heart pounding. He turned to Leela, who stared at him with questioning eyes. What did he say? She asked softly. Edward forced a smile he didn't feel, masking the terror in his chest. He won't hurt you. I won't let him. But as the storm raged outside, Edward knew the truth. Victor wasn't threatening from afar. He was already closer than Edward dared to admit. The night stretched endlessly, the storm outside battering the mansion as though it too sensed the war brewing inside. Edward had locked every door, sealed every window, and activated security systems that hadn't been used in years. Still, unease crawled under his skin. He knew Victor, knew the man's patience, his cruelty. When Victor made a move, it was never random. Leela sat curled up on the sofa, her small fingers tracing the carved edges of the music box. She had hardly spoken since the phone call. Her silence was louder than any cry, carrying grief and fear far too heavy for a child her age. Edward knelt beside her, lowering his voice. Leela, I know this is frightening, but I need you to trust me. I'll keep you safe. Her eyes glistened. You won't leave me, will you? Like you left Mom? The question stabbed deeper than any of Victor's threats. Edward flinched, his breath catching. He had no words, only regret pressing against his chest. But finally he forced himself to speak. No, he whispered, his voice raw. Not this time. I promise. Leela studied him for a long moment, as if searching for truth in his face. Then, slowly, she rested her head against his shoulder. The warmth of her small body against his sent a shock of unfamiliar emotion through Edward, something between guilt and love. For the first time in years, he felt human, but the illusion of peace shattered with the shrill blare of the mansion's alarm system. Edward shot to his feet, adrenaline flooding his veins. The monitors in his study flickered, showing movement outside the gates. Dark figures slipping through the storm. 3, 4, maybe more. Stay here, Edward ordered, but Leela clung to his hand, her eyes wide with terror.
No, don't leave me.
The fear in her voice mirrored Clara's warnings from the past, and Edward knew he couldn't leave her behind. Grabbing the handgun, he pulled Leela close and moved swiftly through the house, every step deliberate, his senses sharpened. The power flickered, then died completely. Darkness swallowed the mansion, broken only by the faint glow of lightning through the windows. The silence was suffocating, until a heavy thud echoed from the east wing. They were inside. Edward's heart pounded, but his grip on Leela never loosened. He guided her into the hidden passage behind the library, a relic from the mansion's original design. Dusk coated the narrow corridor, but it offered concealment. Stay here. Don't make a sound, he whispered, pressing the music box back into her hands. No matter what happens, don't come out. A tear slid down her cheeks, but she nodded bravely. Edward stepped back into the hallway, gun raised, his breath slow and measured. He wasn't just defending a house anymore. He was defending the only piece of Clara left, the only chance to make right what he had once destroyed. A shadow moved ahead. Footsteps. Whispered voices. Edward took aim, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then, out of the darkness, a figure stepped into view, drenched from the storm, a pistol in hand. But it wasn't Victor. It was someone Edward knew. Someone he never expected to see again. And they whispered his name. Edward. The voice carried through the corridor, trembling but familiar, stirring ghosts Edward thought he'd buried. His grip on the gun faltered as lightning flashed, illuminating the intruder's face. Michael. Edward's voice was a rasp. It was his younger brother. A man he hadn't seen in nearly a decade. A man who had once stood at his side, then turned his back when Edward's hunger for power consumed everything between them. Edward's throat tightened. What the hell are you doing here? Michael lowered his weapon slightly, though his eyes remained sharp. Saving you, apparently. Or maybe saving her. Edward stiffened. Her. You know about Leela. Michael's gaze flickered, and in that brief hesitation Edward found his answer. His brother knew more than he should, more than Edward himself had known until hours ago. Michael stepped closer, water dripping from his coat. Clara came to me, Edward, years ago. When you left her, she had nowhere else to turn. I helped her, protected her. You think you were the only man she trusted. Think again. The words struck like daggers, cutting through the fragile bond of memory. Edward's chest burned not from jealousy but from guilt. He had abandoned Clara, and she had turned to the one man he had betrayed most. Why now? Edward demanded. Why come here after all this time? With Victor circling like a wolf, and Clara gone. Michael's expression darkened. Because Victor isn't circling, he's already inside your life. He's closer than you think. And if you don't act, you'll lose everything, Edward. Including her. Edward's jaw clenched. He had spent years distrusting Michael, blaming him for walking away. Now, faced with this reunion in the dark, he couldn't untangle whether his brother was savior or spy. You expect me to believe you after all these years? Edward hissed. After the way you left? Michael's voice cracked with restrained fury. I left because you destroyed everything, Edward. You chose money over family. You chose power over love. And now, all of it has come back to haunt you? Edward's hand tightened on the gun, but he didn't raise it. His heart hammered too loud, his mind torn between anger and desperation. And then, Leela's voice shattered the standoff. Uncle Michael. Both men froze. Edward turned sharply. Leela had crept from the hidden passage, clutching the music box, her eyes wide. She stepped toward Michael without fear, as though she had known him all her life. Michael crouched, his features softening. Hey, sweetheart, it's okay. I promised your mom I'd look after you. Edward's stomach dropped. The truth unraveled before him like a cruel joke. Clara hadn't just kept Leela from him. She had placed their daughter in Michael's trust. Edward's world tilted, the weight of betrayal and regret crushing him. Clara had chosen Michael where Edward had failed. But before Edward could speak, the sound of glass breaking echoed again, this time closer. And from the shadows, a mocking voice drifted through the mansion. Well, isn't this touching? Victor Hale had arrived. The rain had returned that night, hammering against the mansion's wide windows as if nature itself sought entry into Jonathan's carefully guarded world. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with unnerving steadiness, each chime echoing the pounding of his heart. He had always thought of storms as something outside, distant, separated from him by walls and wealth. But now the storm was inside too, within him, within his very bones. Across the room sat Clara, her small frame dwarfed by the armchair, her hands clutching the teacup Jonathan had given her. Her eyes, so hauntingly familiar, darted toward him, then away, as if she carried words too heavy for her lips to bear. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling. Mommy said, if something ever happened to her, I should find you. The words struck him like a lightning bolt. He gripped the edge of the desk, the weight of his past crashing down. Your mother, she told you to come here. His voice cracked under the strain. Clara nodded slowly, her golden hair catching the lamplight in a way that made his chest ache. She said you'd know what to do. That you'd keep me safe. Jonathan's vision blurred. He had built an empire by being unshakable, by outlasting storms. But this child, this fragile piece of innocence, was undoing him more thoroughly than any business rival ever had. Clara, he whispered, his voice breaking. What was your mother's name? The little girl hesitated. For a moment silence pressed between them like a suffocating blanket. Then she said it. A single name that shattered the dam inside Jonathan's soul. Her name was Emily. Jonathan staggered back as though struck. Emily. The name he had buried deep within his heart. The name he had tried to forget through money, power, and distractions. She had been the only woman he ever truly loved. The one he had let slip away in a moment of pride and blindness. No, he muttered, shaking his head. It can't be. Clara tilted her head, confused by his reaction. You knew her. He couldn't answer right away. The room spun, memories cascading like shards of broken glass. Emily's laughter in summer fields. Her voice calling his name during nights that now seemed like lifetimes ago. The way she had walked away when he chose ambition over love. And now this little girl, Emily's daughter, sat before him. Jonathan's heart thundered as a thought both terrifying and miraculous clawed its way into his mind. Could it be? Was Clara not just Emily's child, but his child too? The possibility was overwhelming. His throat tightened, his hands trembling. Clara, he whispered. Do you know who your father was? Clara's eyes fell to her lap. She stirred the tea nervously before answering, her words soft and sorrowful. Mommy never told me his name. She only said, he had a good heart once, but he let it get lost. The words pierced Jonathan like knives. Emily's voice lived in those words. Emily's disappointment, her sorrow, her unhealed wound. Tears stung Jonathan's eyes, unbidden, unstoppable. The little girl's presence, her resemblance, her innocent trust. It all screamed the truth he had been too afraid to face. He reached toward Clara, his hand trembling, but stopped short, afraid of the answer that hovered over them like the storm outside. Clara, he said, his voice breaking. Those 4 words you said at my door, what were they? The Clara looked up at him then, her eyes glistening. She took a deep breath and whispered them again, her voice fragile yet firm. Daddy, I need you. Jonathan's chest heaved. The storm outside raged with ferocity, but the one inside him had finally broken. He knew then, deep in his bones, that this was no accident, no cruel twist of fate. This was his second chance, his redemption. Yet even as warmth surged through him, a shadow lingered. If Emily was gone, who had Clara been living with? Why had she been sent alone into the night to find him? The storm might have broken, but the danger was not over. Jonathan realizes Clara might be his daughter and hears her repeat the 4 words. Daddy, I need you. But looming questions about Emily's fate and Clara's past hint that a deeper tragedy and threat are still to come. The storm had passed, but its aftermath lingered inside Jonathan like a hurricane still spinning. He sat on the edge of his bed, head buried in his trembling hands, while Olivia lay asleep in the next room. The small, fragile sound of her breathing reached him like a lullaby, a reminder that for the first time in years, he was not alone in the mansion. The clock struck 3 in the morning, its chime echoing like a judgment. Jonathan had lived his entire life guided by numbers, profits, percentages, projections. But now, a different number gnawed at his conscience. 4 words spoken by a child had collapsed the empire he had built around his heart. She said, "You're mine." He rose, pacing the length of his study. Memories battered him, Emma's laughter, the way she used to roll her eyes when he'd missed dinners for meetings, the night she'd beg him to slow down. He never listened. And now, the universe had delivered the consequence of his arrogance in the form of a daughter he never knew existed. His phone vibrated on the desk. A message glowed on the screen, his lawyer reminding him of the board meeting tomorrow. The company was in freefall. Shareholders demanded his presence. But Jonathan could only think of Olivia, her wide eyes staring at him with a mixture of fear and fragile hope. Emma kept her hidden from me, he whispered to the shadows. Why? The question dug into his chest. Was it to protect Olivia from him, from the emptiness of his life? Or had Emma simply wanted her daughter to grow up without the suffocating world of wealth? The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting the house in gold. Olivia sat at the dining table, her legs dangling off the chair. She looked impossibly small in the vast space, her fingers curled around a spoon she barely touched. Jonathan sat opposite her, his throat dry. Olivia, do you want to stay here, with me? She froze, spoon midair, her eyes locking onto his. For a moment he saw Emma in her, same piercing gaze, same vulnerability masked with quiet strength. I don't know you, she whispered, her voice trembling. But Mama said, you'd keep me safe. The words shattered what little defense Jonathan still had. He pushed back his chair, dropping to his knees before her. His hands shook as he reached for hers. I wasn't there when I should have been. I failed your mother. But I won't fail you, not now. Not ever. Olivia's lip quivered. She wanted to believe him. He could see it in her eyes, but trust was not a switch that could be flipped. It had to be earned, and Jonathan knew it would take time. I don't want your money, Olivia whispered, her tiny voice carrying the weight of an entire world. I just want a dad. The sentence struck like lightning. It wasn't wealth, power, or possessions she sought, it was love. The one thing Jonathan had starved himself of his entire life. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, as if shielding her from the ghosts of his past. For the first time, the mansion felt alive, filled with warmth rather than silence. That afternoon, Jonathan canceled the board meeting. Let the company burn if it must. A new empire needed building, one forged not in steel and glass, but in love and sacrifice. As night fell, Olivia stood at the window looking at the stars. Mama used to say stars are holes in the sky where love shines through, she murmured. Jonathan wrapped an arm around her. Then she's watching us right now. Olivia leaned her head against his chest, and for the first time in his life, Jonathan Sinclair, the untouchable billionaire, understood the meaning of wealth. Not in fortune, not in fame, but in 4 simple words that had broken his heart, only to rebuild it stronger than ever. I just want Dad.
On a stormy night, a little girl on a millionaire's door with nothing but tears in her eyes. When she whispered, "Mom just died. She sent me to you," his entire world shattered. What began as a stranger's knock soon revealed a secret of blood, love, and redemption, proving that sometimes family finds us in the most unexpected ways.